Well, let's get on to Alex Antic, one of the great senators here who will be appearing also with Outsiders live there at CPAC. Get your tickets, I tell you, Brisbane, October 5th and 6th. Alex Antic, we can't wait to see you there in Brizzy. We might have a beer or two together with Rita and James, you know, the four of us, and we'll shoot the breeze. But before that, tell us, what on earth is happening with this insane misinformation, disinformation nonsense, this Orwellian garbage being foisted on us by the Albanese government?
Yeah, well, Ryan, first of all, that gathering sounds like a hate crime waiting to happen right there. But look, putting that aside, it is a shocking piece of legislation. I thought in my time in Parliament I'd seen the worst that could be possibly shoveled up with the guillotined and non-debated digital ID bill. But this so-called combating misinformation and disinformation bill in itself, I think, is even worse. And, you know, it's easy to get pulled into platitudes about how bad this is. But in essence, what this bill, if it's passed, is going to do is shut down free speech for Australian non-mainstream media digital content providers. So there will be no avenue to escape that dragnet. So to give your listeners and your watcher viewers some sort of idea, this bill has been out for public consultation in an exposure draft earlier in the year. It was widely canned. It had something like 23,000 submissions back to the minister, none of which were really released. But that doesn't happen unless people are worried. What we've got now is the new version, which may also be equally as bad, if not pruned around the edges. And what it's going to do is create a legislative framework for misinformation. That is, information online which is shared, which is said to be reasonably verifiable as false and misleading and causing serious harm. Now, that all sounds like gobbledygook because, frankly, it is. And the finder of fact, which may well be the Administrative Review Tribunal, ACMA, whoever it is, you know, there are mechanisms, will ultimately tell people online what they can and can't say. And to make it even more hilariously, paradoxically incredible, the government in their explanatory memorandum used the example of public health as, through the COVID period, as an example of where misinformation was spread. And the example they used to show misinformation was the fact that people were spreading Donald Trump's statement about injecting bleach to defeat COVID and how dangerous that was for people. Of course, that was completely debunked. I mean, only this government could use misinformation in order to prosecute the case of misinformation, but it highlights the point exactly. Misinformation ultimately is in the eye of the beholder, and we've seen it time and time again. I mean, my Freedom of Information application last year, which highlighted the Department of Home Affairs actively sending people, Australians who had posted things online, back to the parent companies, Facebook and Twitter at the time, in order to point the finger at them for sharing misinformation, much of which was actually ultimately designed to be true. So this is going to become a ministry of truth. It's going to become an absolute death knell for freedom of speech in this country. And without freedom of speech, there's no freedom at all.
James.
Well, I mean, Alex, you know, what is the coalition then going to do to actively oppose this? Because it will get up through the House, certainly, but what about in the Senate? And does the coalition here have a bit of a free speech problem? Because, of course, you know, the e-safety commissioner was something that was developed under the Morrison government. What is the coalition going to not just say this is bad, but actually actively campaign against those who say, but you need to do something about misinformation? Because as far as I'm concerned, it's a non-problem, and as plenty of the submissions to the bill said, this is already being managed by voluntary regulation and, you know, platforms and things. You do not need this central minister of truth, whether it is ACMA or the ART or whomever.
Yeah, and it's going to give enormous powers to ACMA, the media authority, in order to set up codes, in order to codify the landscape. So, look, it looks on the surface to be saleable, but ultimately it's not. And look, this came out on Thursday, so your position that the coalition will reach hasn't yet been through the party room and adopted and taken yet. But look, I don't see how we can't oppose this. Frankly, I certainly won't be voting for it. I can tell you that right now. And I know there'll be many others that share my concerns, as they should, because ultimately this will serve as a great big wet blanket over the top of free speech. And I mean, the thing that really stands out about this is how much the left of politics in this country seem to adore this kind of cosmopolitan authoritarianism in 2024, the Greens party of Bob Brown and the Labor Party of Bob Hawke this wouldn't have even reached the minister's table, frankly. This would have been waved off. But we're dealing with a very different beast now. The critical part to this will be the crossbench in the Senate and the Australian Greens, frankly. And the test here is on for the Australian Greens. People have to understand from the left of politics, this might all seem great when you are apparently clamping down on, cookers and whatever other pejorative terms they use. But the pendulum can swing very quickly. And these mechanisms start off as a sword and end up as a shield, or vice versa. So politics should be running a million miles from this if we are to be taken credibly as a free speech country. Already out there, as many of you have probably seen in the social media world, people are saying once again, as they did through the COVID period, what is going on in Australia?
Rita.
They are, but I don't think the Greens and the left in general have much to fear, because they know the bureaucracy always sides with them. Yes, it could change, but we're talking about disinformation and lies. And yet this week we had the biological reality bill, which I would have thought every MP could back, because we're talking about biological realities. But of course the Greens and Labor combined to vote against it. And interestingly, there were 4 Liberal senators, Alex, your colleagues, who also voted against this bill. How is that? How do we continuously have Liberal MPs crossing...
And just spell out what the bill was saying.
Well, it's a biological reality bill. It's basically affirming biological realities. You're protecting women's sex-based rights.
There are two
women's
sexes, men and women. Pauline Hanson put it
this
forward.
This shouldn't be controversial, but you've got Liberal senators who continuously tend to vote against these measures, or in this occasion, they didn't vote against it. They just weren't there to vote for it. They were missing in action.
Yeah, and look, in many cases, people are paired. That's the first thing. So this was actually a bill to amend the Sex Discrimination Act. And of course, as many of your viewers would know, the Sex Discrimination Act was amended in 2013 under the Gillard government in order to remove the definition of man and woman. Wow. Not exactly controversial, I would have thought. And Pauline was seeking to effectively flick the switch back to the 2013 position, which I think is eminently sensible, frankly. And look, that is the question. These are often taken as conscience votes inside the Liberal Party. We have a mechanism to do that whereby people can cross the floor and there isn't, the same sort of collective meltdown that we have in the Labor Party. But ultimately, this is the very nub of why it is that we see the case Tickle and Giggle, which many people would be familiar with. I mean, the fact that the definition of women is not there inside the legislative framework allows these platforms to be targeted sometimes, by people that say they are transgender or whatever the case may be. So I think it's a very important position. I'm looking at other ways to adopt a similar sort of approach, and we'll look to talk about that in the near future. But it really does need to be addressed. It's as simple as that. And also, I might say on that,
and of course, Alex,
issue, I think
carry on.
Yeah, I'm just going to say, in relation to the 2013 Sexual Discrimination Act amendments, many people would never have foreseen what came of that down the track 10 years later. The same can be said for combating misinformation and disinformation in this bill. We don't even know where this is going to end up at this stage.
Absolutely. And Alex, you, of course, famously went around asking all those politicians and bureaucrats, what is a woman? And none of them seem to be able to answer it, which proves the point. Can't wait to see you at CPAC, Alex. And in the meantime, please tell the party room that they must not only oppose the misinformation bill, but they must promise to repeal it when you get into government next year.